Welcome back to another episode of Activista Rise Up. I am Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina, your host. You can follow this show on all my social media platforms, or you can visit Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts. Today, I have the pleasure of having two national leaders of our Asian American community joining me in a discussion about the importance of joining together and learning about our mutual struggles and stop hate against our Asian American community. Alvina Yeh, Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Labor Alliance, and Jun Choi, co-founder of Jersey Promise, a nonprofit organization in New Jersey. He's also a board member of DEMOS, a national think tank advancing issues of social justice in a multiracial democracy. Welcome, Alvina and Jun. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Given the last 4 years of Donald Trump and the hate that he woke up against our immigrant and Asian community. So I really appreciate having this conversation so we can all learn how to be better allies for our common struggles for social and economic justice. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Why don't you tell me a little bit for our audience, a little bit about who you are and the organizations that you're representing, and then we can get into a conversation about how we can all work together to stop Asian hate for real. Yeah. Alvina, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Alvina Yeh, and it's hard to talk about myself without talking about my family. And so my family is from Vietnam, and we're of Chinese descent, and we're among the many boat people who escaped from the Vietnam War. And I came to this work because when my mom came to this country, she didn't speak any English at first and had to learn English, but she got a good union job sorting mail. She's still sorting mail to this day. And that was rare for my family back then to be able to find that kind of stability. And it's even more rare now in this really increasingly anti-immigrant and xenophobic political atmosphere. And so the work that we do at APALA is to help make sure that there are more good jobs for more immigrants and more Asian Americans in our community. So APALA is a member-led organization. We have chapters all across the country, and we're focused on centering our work on workers' rights and economic justice. And we want to build a powerful agenda for Asian American and Pacific Islander working people. And we run campaigns around economic, racial, and immigrant justice. And just to give you a quick sense of our work, this past year after the lockdown started, we moved quickly to fundraise and distribute funds to our most impacted community members who are also essential workers or who were laid off or undocumented. And many of our members have lost their jobs as entire industries have been decimated by COVID. So we've also been working with unions and employers to provide guidance on how to protect Asian American workers, as many of them are on the front lines and also facing increased racism on the job.
Yeah. Thank you, Alvina. We get to talk a little bit more about the work that APALA does on economic justice, specifically now around the COVID-19 pandemic. But Jun, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are so our audience knows, a little bit about you, the work that you do with Jersey Promise in New Jersey, and just who you are as a leader for our Asian American community.
Well, first of all, Patricia, thank you so much. Buenos dias. Thank you so much for including me in this important discussion. And Alvina, it's a real honor to be on the same panel with you. So my name is Jun Choi. I am an immigrant. My family immigrated from South Korea when I was 3 years old, and we first settled in a city called Elizabeth, New Jersey, that I think Patricia and many others throughout the state will know.
Yeah.
We, like many other immigrant families, we struggled when we first arrived. My dad worked at a gas station. My mom worked an overnight shift at a White Castle. If you ever saw the movie Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, a funny version of it, but I often think about the struggles that my mom had when she worked that overnight shift when I think about my work with Jersey Promise today. So later on in my career, I was fortunate enough to serve as Mayor of Edison, and I think that's when I first met you.
Yes, that's when I first met you.
And we were doing coalition building across many different racial and ethnic groups. And I had the fortune of being the chair of New Jersey Policy Perspective, which is a leading progressive think tank here in New Jersey, and also serving on the national board of Demos before we co-founded Jersey Promise. So Jersey Promise is really meant to be a policy, education, and advocacy organization serving the Asian American community here throughout the state. We are the third highest percentage Asian American population state in the country, only after Hawaii and California. And in particular, we focus in on the struggling and marginalized Asian American community. So, I think the poverty definition is such a poor definition. We think the ALICE threshold is much more accurate. So about 26% of Asian Americans, and there are over 900,000 Asian Americans now in the great state of New Jersey, are struggling to survive day to day. And I don't think that story has really been told all that much, with the fallacy of the model minority myth and all of these stories. I think Asian Americans really struggle still to find our voice and to define ourselves in this country. And so Atlanta was such a pivotal moment, a threshold moment for our community nationwide. I think the dam has burst.
Yeah.
So many voices are coming to the table and speaking up like they've never spoken up before. And I think this is an important opportunity to move the multiracial work that we're all doing forward in collaboration. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're welcome. One of the things that, when I heard Representative Andy Kim talk about his own experience being doubted as an American serving in the Foreign Relations Committee, and his loyalties being questioned, and then having to have the conversation that he had with his son about hate against Asian Americans. To me, that touched, because we don't moms and we have kids, and you think about, how hard it is to tell a little boy or a little kid, like, you have to be prepared for the hate. So, and I thought about that and how difficult that is for an African American woman to be able to tell that to their African American sons. So, so that made me realize that we're all on the same boat. We're like, we're the other in this country, and we gotta figure out how to understand each other's struggles and to be able to come together. So before I move on to the next question, I wanted to say that this discussion on anti-Asian hate and anti-immigrant hate, for me, is totally connected to the struggle that our African American brothers and sisters are having against police brutality and for Black Lives Matter, because it's all connected through this uprising of hate of the other, right? Racism, uprising of white nationalism that we all have to figure out how to fight together. So I want to say that I am in solidarity and with our African American brothers and sisters, that they continue to stand up against police brutality in places like Minneapolis right now, but it is all over the country. It's also in Atlanta. So I wanted to go back to that because I think that this rising of anti-hate for the other, it creates a lot of anxiety in all of us. So how are you managing that personally in your personal life, so that you're able to evoke a different, more hopeful perspective towards the community that we're supposed to lead, right? Because sometimes we don't focus on ourselves. So how do you manage that emotion, that feeling yourself, staying whole and be able to be that for your families? Alvina?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it's going great. It's honestly not, right? And I think it's been hard to hear about all these incidents about our elders being attacked. But then when the shooting happened, it hit me on a whole nother level. And I think it was really personally triggering, thinking about past experiences that I had being fetishized or dealing with unwanted sexual aggression or attention from men. And I think about these women in Atlanta who are like many aunties and immigrant women that we've met who've just faced immense barriers trying to find work and support their families. And they're in this industry with like very little worker protection and oversight. And a lot of people have been talking about racism, right? But that specific incident to me is about this intersection of race and gender and immigration status and work. and the intersection of like misogyny and white supremacy and how that empowers the acts of violence, but also on the policymaking side, how people have completely excluded those kinds of industries from protections, and it had made it harder for women and immigrants to survive in this country. And so all that comes to mind, and I don't, like, again, it hasn't been easy. I haven't really figured it out fully, but I did a lot of interviewing of therapists, and I finally found a therapist, and we're going to be doing that weekly now. And family time, spending time with loved ones, and then just being in coalition with groups that are working locally and nationally. It feels good to be able to try to lend our small voice to this issue.
Jun?
Similar to Alvina, this is a hard time for our community. And I think on a personal and family level, we're processing this still. We're still thinking about, my kids are only 8 years old. I have twins. What do I tell them about what America will be like for them in the future when they grow up? So there's been all of this renewed discussion about identity, about who we are, about our place in America, about and I think, the Latinx community, Patricia, and other immigrant communities share in this, that we feel like foreigners, that there is this othering feeling, right? That we are invisible and neglected and not part of the larger American conversation when tragedies like this occur. And I'm really glad you mentioned my good friend, Congressman Andy Kim, who has been doing a terrific job speaking out on these issues, because he has 2 boys, younger than my kids, actually.
Yes.
And he's now spoken openly about it, which I'm very proud that he has, because it's really important that, I think, for non-Asian Americans to see that, we're just like anyone else. We're struggling over this. I think the mainstream media portrayal of Asian Americans has not always been one that is sort of fully human, right? It's very disappointing. And we're continually misunderstood. And I think we're sort of the least studied racial group in America. But I have to tell you that what has given me a lot of hope are my non-Asian American friends reaching out and being in solidarity and, lifting up my spirits and sending me the text message that, they felt this way, and that we really need to stand together. So thank you so much for inviting us to have this discussion beyond the Asian American community, which I think is so important.
Because I feel that, I had so many good friends who do this work because, in the labor movement, the Asian American community is so critical to so many critical fights, but those stories don't get told too much. So I always feel like, oh my God, we should be talking more about how intertwined our struggles are around social justice and immigrant justice. But I wanted to lift up one thing that I read in your report in Jersey Promise that really stood out to me, because I never really thought about it that way. And this whole idea that the being elevated as a model minority in the American cultural lingo has really not benefited Asian Americans, because the way you put it in the report, you say we are really, the conservative Republicans use it to dismantle affirmative action and to make us different than the other people. And then progressives don't really trust us. So because we're not people of color enough, or they feel like we have somehow more privilege. How do you manage that duality of when you do your advocacy, or when you are trying to expand the network? Because I think that as we work with working people, have to figure out how do I expand my power? So how do we manage that duality, both in the outside world politically and also internally with some of your community members that perhaps don't want to be as vocal?
Yeah, Patricia, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. It's a constant struggle that many of us feel within the Asian American community. As you know, we're not a monolithic community. There are wide differences of opinion, multiple religions, languages. We come from different lived experiences. But I think about how often the Asian American community and any new immigrant group, how they're used, how they're scapegoated in the larger American conversation. I think of the Chinese laborers, the men who came starting in the 1840s or so with the gold rush, and then they played such a key role in helping build the transcontinental railway system from California all the way out to Utah. And then there were the many Irish American laborers who helped build the eastern section of this railway. And there was a big celebration, I remember reading about this in US history. There was a big celebration in Utah when the two railroad lines finally connected. And now we had a true transnational railway system. And the pictures that were taken of that time, though there were thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese laborers who worked on that project, they were all white. It was like a whitewashing.
Yeah,
it was like
yeah.
the significant sacrifices, and actually many Chinese laborers died helping build that railway system, but they were completely erased from the history books until later scholars and Asian American studies professors brought it to the attention that this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of that example in the modern context of like Ed Bloom, the conservative activist who rounded up Asian American students who did not get into Harvard and filed a lawsuit. And his goal is to dismantle all affirmative action in the country. It's not just at this elite higher ed institution.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he used Asian Americans to get his way. Fortunately, he hasn't won yet in that lawsuit. But that is so frequent of how the story is told. And then also, I think on the progressive space as well, there are wonderful progressives who are very inclusive and want Asian Americans and recent immigrants to be at the table. But oftentimes I would be, in these progressive strategy meetings, be the only Asian American voice there. And the conversations were not really focused on Asian Americans or the important role that we can play, now almost 7% of the US population, but in key states like Georgia and Nevada and these critical swing states
Mm-hmm.
that can turn easily one way or the other, that Asian Americans can play a defining role and already have in the civil rights movement and so many other times in history. So that's a really important point, and I'm glad that has gotten renewed recognition in this recent times.
And I think that it has to do, with this misperception that we have, and I say we because I'm part of the American society here, that Asian Americans somehow are better off economically and than other immigrants or other people of color. And what really struck me from some of the research that has been published is that's not the case. The level of income inequality among the Asian American community is very high, and the number of people who are not doing so well is very high. And I know that APALA, in the work that you all do, you try to address issues of income inequality. But how do you elevate and engage in that discussion about Asian Americans are working class? There's a big, and they also are engaged in the struggle for workers' rights, in the struggle for economic opportunity. So how are you doing that work, Alvina?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I kind of want to tie it back to what Jun was just saying too, in that how Asian Americans are being used as a wedge minority in this moment around anti-Asian violence is that many folks are using this opportunity to call for more policing, to offer cash rewards for turning people in, or asking for stricter hate crime legislation or stricter punishments. And none of that actually makes our communities safer, right? It actually creates more racial division, and it puts more people in a judicial and carceral system that's anti-Black and racist, right? So I think there's a clear conversation here about how we can work in solidarity with other Black and Brown communities about naming what the real root causes of violence are. And in this situation, a lot of it has to do with economic scarcity during the pandemic, which is in some ways false because all these billionaires are getting richer during the pandemic. There's plenty of resources to go around. It's about where those resources are going. But, that's the root cause of violence. And I think we really need to be careful about not falling into the trap of, in order to protect our communities, we have to further, punish or incarcerate other communities. And that's just not, that's one of the things I've seen come out of this discourse that I want to name and push back against. But to your question about, Asian Americans as working class folks, I mean, that's absolutely right. And as Jun said, we're not a monolithic community. And, even when you look at AAPI and what it stands for, there's Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And even between Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, there's a vastly different experience. For one, Pacific Islanders are native to the land that was stolen and, or, being colonized. And so that's a completely different experience. They don't have an immigrant experience. Even for Southeast Asians, the experience of being a refugee, of escaping war, there's so many different impacts and experiences that our community have. And so the economic scarcity, poverty, deportation, having your native sovereignty question, these are all things that are unique to different parts of our community that aren't really lifted up in this broader narrative of Asian American success.
Yeah. There's this misperception that the lack of immigration status or the lack of ability to become a citizen doesn't impact the Asian American community. So I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on that, because I think we need, this real misconceptions out there about what all the issues impacting this community. So can you talk a little bit about that? Some of the immigration issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know people think immigration in the first faces maybe come to mind, or the first images are maybe the border wall or Mexico, but immigration is a Black issue. Immigration is an Asian issue, and it definitely impacts our communities. I mentioned that we started our COVID community fund, and a lot of those funds, most of those funds actually have gone to undocumented folks who weren't able to get any kind of stimulus relief, right? But these workers are still contributing to our society, are still paying their taxes. And not that you have to be, meritorious or worthy in order to be in this country, but there are huge swaths of people that are living in the shadows in this country. And the government's not taking care of those people at all. So that's something we've been really trying to focus our financial efforts around this past year.
Yeah. I want to go back. I remember I'm thinking about Minneapolis and what's going on out there, and all the organizing that was happening at some point with the Hmong community over there, trying to get them more improved in their condition, even though they're refugees, they were living in very, very precarious conditions. So is there any active organizing going on around workplace issues, but also around, even around this issue of the vaccination and access to vaccination during this crisis? Is there any efforts on those fronts that we can support or we can help elevate? Because, I'm a immigrant rights activist, but because the majority of the undocumented population, especially Mexican or Central American, we focus that the rhetoric there. But I do know that it's a whole host of other immigrants that we don't really talk about and elevate their stories. So I want to take ownership of failing to do that. So,
yeah. So here in New Jersey, as you know, the vast majority of immigrants are API or Latinx. That's why Patricia and I can have a lot of fun on the whole range of issues here. So on healthcare and vaccination access, and more broadly, healthcare access, is a hugely important issue that I think we can work on together to really provide more opportunities for these immigrant families. I would also say that there's a lot of opportunities on this whole bias crimes issue, and we've been working with the Attorney General's office, Gray Wall, who is a terrific, actually Sikh American, and he only became a lawyer because he felt that South Asian and Americans and Muslim Americans were being victimized after the 9/11 tragedy. Again, another time, different groups being scapegoated.
Yeah.
So on the bias crimes issues, we were able to release data that the state had, and the state police and all these local municipal police departments had, that they never shared until just recently. We were able to get them to more frequently release that data. And what does that story tell? Of course, it says that Latinx and API communities are underreporting dramatically. And I think an obvious project for us to work together on with all immigrant groups is, number one, to focus in on community education that's culturally competent, multilingual, and get information out about how to protect yourself in this crazy time of rising hate crimes, and how to work with law enforcement. And I know that's a really big struggle with, in particular, newer immigrant communities. But we need to make it clear that law enforcement needs to separate out safety with trying to identify immigration status, and that needs to be completely bifurcated for communities to really come out. The other area is, I think, on education. There's so much, when you look at the curriculum in this state and across the country, it is still behind the times. Now there's this new movement. There's a Make Us Visible campaign, a grassroots campaign in California, Connecticut, New Jersey, and other states now that want to update how we tell U.S. history and the civil rights history, and contributions of Cesar Chavez and all these great activists that are not getting as much attention as they should, and really help for the next generation, make sure that these young immigrant kids feel that they have a place here in America, that they are important, that they have a sense of belonging, and that they can make a significant contribution to help our democracy.
Yeah, I was thinking of the first real history book that I read, Howard Zinn's The Real History of the United States. And I'm actually watching the documentary that mentions that book, Exterminate All the Brutes. I don't know if you're seeing that on HBO. It's very telling about the real history around, the different groups that built the European wealth and the American wealth. So I would recommend some of those readings. And I totally agree that there's not enough real history being taught to our kids, and we have to do that work. We were talking about the education and history, but I wanted to come back to this point about how do we work with the police in terms of reporting crimes, and like what is, if you are like a community member who sees something happening, like how do we become better allies to support specific issues of hate crimes that we see, right? That's like one action that is immediate. The long-term working together and learning about each other, I think that's more long-term. But if folks want to do something, if they see something, what would you recommend for them to do? Because I totally understand your concern, Alvina, not to criminalize more, but at the same time, how do you create a sense of safety, and how can people help?
Yeah, the question is interesting to me because it's a little bit like, putting a Band-Aid on like a much bigger wound. Yes, I think individual interventions in situations where it's physically safe can be helpful. We've seen a lot of great bystander intervention trainings out there. But ultimately, I think the problems are larger and more societal. And it's like this analogy of like asking people to recycle when, corporations and governments aren't going to invest more in climate change policy, right? It's kind of like that, where it's like, yeah, as individuals, we should donate to and support local grassroots organizations. We should actively read up and fight to become anti-racist, and don't make your people of color friends do all the work and do your own Googling, right? There's actually a really good newsletter I've been reading every day called the Anti-Racism Daily Newsletter that just does briefs on different topics around being anti-racist. And I think all those things are good, but as far as like stopping hate overall, or making the root causes of violence going away, or making our communities safer, I think it has to be a community and policy-wide conversation.
Yeah. There is an effort right now in Congress, right, to increase hate, policy. It's a policy solution that they're offering. What's your position on it? Because I really didn't understand what they were getting at. So, yeah.
I mean, this is not an official APALA policy, so I'll put that or
Yes.
opinion. This is my personal opinion, is that, I believe in abolition, and I believe in a space where we can think about solutions to safety that are not based in incarceration, not based in police, in systems that were inherently set up around preserving white supremacy. And so hate crime legislation just further serves to increase punishment and to increase incarceration in some ways. And so, again, this is my personal opinion. I can understand that that's kind of where people want to go. But again, like, wanting to look at economic scarcity, wanting to look like why communities are feeling that kind of those kinds of anxieties. And I think a lot of this is exacerbated by COVID, right? All the ways that our government has failed to provide economic or social security for people are causing all of these other ripple effects to happen. And so I would look to actually addressing the pandemic and addressing how we can have a more equitable response to COVID recovery.
Jun, since you have been an elected officials and you do a lot of some of the policy work. So what are some of the policy solutions that not are just criminalizing or expanding the criminalization of this stuff? Education is one that takes long term. And what are the other ideas that policy proposals that are out there that we could sort of elevate on these issues?
So it's a great question. In a word, partnership. Practically, it's really hard to do, though.
Yes, it is.
A lot of the solutions, while I think the legislation going through Congress is terrific, and certainly, supports the overall national effort. I think a lot of the solutions will be at the local and state levels by building trust-based relationships. And I had the fortune of serving as mayor, and spent a lot of time on police matters, running this 200-person police department. Oftentimes, it was kind of crazy. The Edison PD has a reputation in this state. I have a lot of stab wounds in my back from the various battles that we've had trying to improve and professionalize this police department. And that's one of the areas that I'm very proud that there has been significant progress in Edison. But I think a lot of this just starts with finding the right trusted community leader and the right law enforcement professional. It could be the county prosecutor. It could be the chief of police. It could be another police officer. There has to be a trust that when we report, this information will not be used against us. Mm-hmm. And that, you in fact, as police law enforcement leaders, are here to protect us. And that can be established, but it takes time to build up those relationships, and to have sort of this like confidential hotline, right? It's really nice to have a direct line to a police department and say, hey, we're hearing this. We heard, 6 API women are having troubles, in the small business, let's say, and they're just being victimized and no one's helping them. And to have some investigators sort of, not wearing their uniform in blue and their badge, but going in civilian clothing and starting to build up a dialogue and a trust. That is like, I think the biggest key in making this work is to build these relationships. It's called community policing, it's called partnerships. It's just obvious. It's collaboration. We need to do more of that to make sure this is all working well.
Yeah, one of the biggest damages I think that Donald Trump did to our community trust is that he actually gave a microphone to those people who felt, who always felt a certain way and now felt that they could say it and the president would protect them. So I think that going back to not having that megaphone from Donald Trump, but I don't know if it eliminates the problem because the problem is still there, but I think that is an opportunity to get back to some stability. But in the context of where we are, after 4 years of that, and where we are as a society with the high levels of income inequality and the insecurity around healthcare, I was very impressed by resources that APALA you had on your website about we take care of each other or we can take care of our communities. I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I felt like in many ways it's about how do we protect ourselves, like community, our families, and how do we keep ourselves whole so that we can sort of fight for the America that we believed in. So can you talk a little bit about that effort of we keep each other safe, Alvina?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question. Jun, what you're describing around community policing, in some ways, I feel like we're asking police to maybe do too much, right? We're asking them to be mental health specialists. We're asking them to be victims advocates. We're asking them to be advocates for folks that are differently abled. And I think these are all things that could just, other resources and other professions that could just be better resourced and financed, and that might help alleviate some of the problems that we're seeing in society as well. But the toolkit we're really proud of, we've crowdsourced it and just pulled in a lot of resources from other really great Asian American grassroots organizations that are doing good work and that have suggestions. There's something in there about like community ambassador programs, especially in areas in the Chinatowns where they have seen more violence. And so I encourage folks to check that out because we've just tried to read up and find the best resources that we feel like reflect the kind of community that we want to build and the ways that we should protect and keep each other safe.
Yeah. I really clicked there and we'll share some of them on our website because I think it's very helpful. Sometimes we ourselves don't know what to do or where to go. So having that ability to have that information and it's empowering. Where we are, we are still going through the police brutality cases. We still have this case that who knows where it's going to go. We are still in the middle of this movement for Black Lives Matter, for immigrant justice. Now to reduce, to eliminate anti-Asian hate, to like fight back against white nationalism. What gives you hope right now to keep going and to keep fighting for this vision that we have that America can really be a place for all of us, the country that we believe in? So what gives you hope in doing this work, Jun?
Young activists.
Yes, I agree with that.
So many terrific young API activists around the country who joined in the George Floyd movement last year and now are leading the charge for the Asian American community. And they are working collaboratively. They're terrific. They're idealistic, but they're also practical, right? They sort of see what the challenges are, but still continue courageously to fight forward. The other idea that I think is really hopeful is I think more and more activists are realizing that joining forces with the API community makes a whole lot of sense. I'll mention a good friend, Heather McGee, who used to be the president of Demos. I think, Patricia, you and I are big fans.
Yes.
She came out and spoke in New Jersey a few years ago, but she recently wrote a book called The Sum of Us, right? And I encourage everyone who's listening to read this. It's not about the zero-sum game. We're not in this perpetual competitive fight. We need to work together. And what she basically, through research and through her storytelling, argues that racism hurts all of us, including white folks, including people of color. And it's the root cause of so many of our problems in this country. And if we can just get over this and learn to tolerate each other, and actually, better yet, really understand each other and like each other and want to share time together, she argues that it will be that much better. The sum of us, all of us working together, is the solution for America. And that gives me tremendous hope.
Yes, on my reading list for the summer. Hopefully we get to that. Alvina?
Yeah, I'll add it to my library list. As stressful as this past year has been, I think the tone and tenor of conversations around race have been really inspiring and hopeful for me. In many ways, the summer uprisings around Black Lives Matter really paved the way for there to be a national conversation about anti-Asian hate, as folks are calling it in this moment. And it really mirrors to me the ways that we wouldn't have an Asian American civil rights movement without the civil rights movement where the Black community led. And knowing that we have to with Black and brown communities, and we have to center Black and brown struggles in our fight for co-liberation. And there's so much power in the ability to do that, to stand in solidarity and to know that we have to be mindful of the ways where our communities can be divided and be really careful about not falling into that. But all of that is really hopeful for me. I was going to say young people as well. There are so many folks that I'm following online, and also LGBTQ folks that are organizing. They're really at the forefront of political education. And I feel like I've learned so much this past year just from folks that are just starting free Instagram accounts and sharing resources and sharing history. And so I'm learning a lot there. And it's just, organizing is just one of the most optimistic things you can do. And just following these people, learning from folks, being around other organizers. I mean, that's how we're going to win, right? And that feels really hopeful to me.
Yes, I totally agree. To me, it's always about the courage of regular people to take an action or to say enough. And young people are doing that, and they're challenging us to be more courageous. So I also take inspiration for that. But the work that you do is inspiring to me. I hope that we get to inspire other folks to take action and help elevate this conversation to a higher level, to so that we are fully aware that all these issues, all these battles are interconnected. The interconnection of our existence in this country, I think, is something that we have to embrace more. So how can people stay connected with you, Alvina, and the work that you're doing through APALA? And the same question for you, Jun.
Yeah, our website is www.apalanet.org. So that's apalanet.org. And you can find us on all social media channels at APALA National.
And I know you have chapters all over the country.
Yes, we do have chapters all across the country, and anyone can be a member. You don't have to be Asian. You just have to fight for economic justice and workers' rights. And so you can join and become a member at apalanet.org as well.
Okay, we will make sure we promote the website and all your resources, educating the community around anti-Asian hate. And Jun, how can people stay connected with you and with Jersey Promise and with Demos and all your work that you do?
By the way, Alvina is sort of selling herself short. She has so many other hats at the national level. She is, I believe you're still co-chair of NCAPA, which is an important national coordinating table for so many Asian American grassroots organizations. She's a legend in our community.
Yes, she's a badass.
I feel the same about you, Jun. It's been really a great fun being in this conversation with you.
So yes, jerseypromise.org is how you can stay in touch with us. Our entire website is being redeveloped right now as we speak, and we are significantly ramping up with a terrific infusion of support. I will also send you a GoFundMe page as well if you want to contribute directly. So Jersey Promise, keep a lookout. We're going to publish some exciting new reports, as well as launch more publicly our work on bias crimes with the Latinx community, on education curriculum here in the state, and also a national media campaign, which we're excited to be working on with some of our West Coast partners.
There's so much more we can do together, and I hope that we get to do together. the struggle to end hate against our communities, to create a more perfect union, like I say, is an ongoing challenge. And I think that our children are the future of this country. So I think it's upon us to figure out how to create this racially diverse democracy that we have our parents sacrificed for. So I hope that we can continue to stay in touch, work together, elevate all of our struggles, and just be better allies on our common struggle. So thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, and I hope that we can continue learning and fighting together. So I thank you for the time. As we continue our struggles for creating opportunity and justice, and for ending hate against any of our communities, immigrant, Asian, to continue the struggle to fight for Black lives, let's learn from each other's struggles, let's learn from each other's resiliency, and let's come together to support each other. This is the only way we are going to build the country that our parents dreamed of, a country of opportunity and justice for all. Thank you for tuning in. Follow our show on the internet, on the website, on our social media. Follow both of our guests today and take action and help them protect their communities and help all of us protect all working people.